Elias Thorne, a man whose silhouette against the vast Montana sky was as familiar and enduring as the granite peaks themselves, ran his ranch with a quiet, capable hand. The Bartee was his life, carved from the wilderness by his own sweat and sacrifice, a sprawling testament to his resilience. Yet, the sprawling homestead, the herds of prime cattle, the respect of his men, none of it filled the echoing silence in the big ranch house, a silence that had grown deeper since Martha, his beloved wife, had been taken by the fever 5 years prior. He was a single dad, in a sense, to his land and his men, but the aching void for family, for the laughter of a child, was a constant, unacknowledged companion. He'd seen enough of life to know its harshness, the way it could orphan a soul as easily as it could a lamb. It was this understanding, this hollow in his own heart, that led him one crisp autumn day to the doorway of the Sweetwater County Orphanage, a grim, clapboard building on the outskirts of redemption, its windows like vacant eyes. He hadn't planned it, not really. He'd been in town for supplies and a conversation with Mrs. Gable, the orphanage's weary matron, about the ever-present need for donations had somehow led to him lingering, watching the children in the barren yard. Most were loud, boisterous, vying for attention. But one small boy, no more than 7, sat apart under the shade of a struggling cottonwood, meticulously arranging a collection of pebbles into intricate patterns. He was small for his age, with a shock of unruly brown hair that perpetually fell into eyes the color of warm whiskey, eyes that held a startling depth of old sorrow for one so young. Mrs. Gable had sighed when Elias asked about him. "That's Billy. Been with us nigh on a year now. Found wandering after the stagecoach disaster up near Devil's Pass. No king came forward. Quiet as a church mouse, that one. Keeps to himself. Hardly eats enough to keep a bird alive." Elias watched Billy, and something in the boy's profound solitude resonated with his own. He saw not a damaged child, but a resilient spirit, bent but not broken, much like a young sapling enduring a harsh winter. He saw a reflection of his own guarded heart. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a pull as strong and sure as the turning of the seasons. He spoke to Mrs. Gable, then to the circuit judge, his words spare but firm. The paperwork, the raised eyebrows, the well-meaning cautions about the difficulties of a single man raising a boy, especially a rancher with demanding responsibilities, Elias met them all with his characteristic quiet determination. Within a week, William Billy Jessup, orphan, was to become Billy Thorne, son. The ride back to the Bartee with Billy beside him on the wagon seat was a quiet one. Billy clutched a small, battered satchel containing his few worldly possessions. His gaze fixed on the passing landscape, his small face unreadable. Elias didn't push him to talk, understanding that trust, like a wild colt, couldn't be rushed. It had to be earned, gentled. The ranch hands were surprised, their weathered faces a mixture of curiosity and skepticism when Elias introduced Billy. "This here's Billy," Elias had said, his hand resting briefly on the boy's thin shoulder. "He'll be staying. He's my son now." The declaration, simple and direct, left no room for argument. That first night, Elias tucked Billy into the small room that had once been a nursery. Long ago. A room he'd thought would never hear a child's breath again. As he looked at the small figure huddled under the quilts, a profound sense of rightness, mingled with a daunting trepidation, settled over him. His life, predictable and ordered, had just taken a turn. He had no idea then just how sharp, how utterly shocking that turn would prove to be, or how this small, silent boy held the key to unlocking a future Elias could never have imagined. For now he was just a father, a new father, with a son to protect and a heart slowly, cautiously, beginning to unfurl. Life on the Bartee began to subtly reshape itself around Billy. Elias, a man accustomed to solitude and the gruff camaraderie of his ranch hands, found himself recalibrating his days, his thoughts, his very heart to accommodate the small, quiet presence of his new son. Billy, in turn, was like a wild creature slowly emerging from a shadowed thicket. The first few weeks were marked by a profound silence from the boy, his large, whiskey-colored eyes watching everything, absorbing, assessing. He ate little, spoke less, and often retreated into the world of his pebbles or a tattered book of animal drawings he kept in his satchel. Elias didn't force him. He simply included him. Billy trailed Elias on his morning rounds, a small shadow against the vastness of the ranch. He learned to identify the different brands, the calls of the range birds, the subtle signs of changing weather. Elias taught him how to whittle, how to skip stones on the creek that snaked through their valley, how to listen to the language of the horses. He bought Billy a small pony, a gentle mare named Daisy, and patiently taught him to ride, seeing a flicker of something akin to joy in the boy's eyes when he finally managed to trot a wobbly circle around the corral. The ranch hands, initially wary, slowly warmed to the boy. Cookie, the grizzled camp cook, always had an extra biscuit or a piece of jerky for him. Slim, the youngest hand, showed him how to plait rawhide. Even Jeb, the stoic foreman, was seen whittling a small wooden horse for Billy during a quiet evening by the bunkhouse fire. It was a slow thaw, but bit by bit Billy began to trust, to tentatively reach out. His first word to Elias, a whispered "Pa," when Elias had found him shivering after a nightmare, had made the stoic rancher's heart ache with a fierce, protective tenderness. He was a father. The word settled into Elias's soul, filling a space he hadn't known was quite so empty. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues, Billy pulled something from his satchel. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, intricately carved, hanging on a thin, worn chain. He held it out to Elias, his small hand trembling slightly. "This was Mama's," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chirping crickets. "She told me to keep it safe." Always Elias took the locket, his large, calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. It was old, clearly valuable, though he knew little of such things. "It's beautiful, Billy," he said softly. "Your mama must have loved you very much to give you something so precious." Billy nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Can you open it, Pa?" "My fingers, they're too clumsy." Elias carefully fumbled with the clasp. It sprang open, revealing not one, but two miniature portraits. On one side, a beautiful young woman with kind eyes and hair the color of ripe wheat, undoubtedly Billy's mother. On the other side, a man with a stern but handsome face, his eyes a startling, piercing blue, dressed in the uniform of a cavalry officer. Between the two portraits, tucked into a tiny, almost invisible compartment, was a minuscule, intricately folded piece of parchment. Elias looked at Billy, whose gaze was fixed on the locket with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. This locket, Elias sensed, was more than just a keepsake. It was a mystery, a link to a past Billy barely remembered, a past that had brought him, alone and orphaned, to this remote corner of Montana. Elias carefully refolded the parchment without examining it further, respecting the boy's ownership of this legacy. For now, it was enough that Billy had shared this treasure with him. His life had already taken a profound turn with Billy's arrival. He was learning to be a father, finding a depth of love he thought had died with Martha. He had no inkling that the contents of this small silver locket, and the identity of the man with the piercing blue eyes, were about to send his well-ordered world into a spin, leading to a revelation that would shock not just him, but the entire territory. The quiet joy he'd found in fatherhood was about to be tested in ways he could never have foreseen. The locket became a silent emblem of Billy's past, a tangible link to the parents he barely remembered. Elias, respecting the boy's unspoken grief, never pressed him about its contents beyond that first sharing. Billy often wore it tucked inside his shirt, a secret comfort against his skin. Life on the bar T settled into a new rhythm, one enriched by Billy's growing confidence and the deepening bond between father and son. Billy's laughter, once a rare and precious sound, became more frequent, echoing in the ranch yard as he chased stray chickens or helped Elias mend fences. He was learning the ways of the ranch, his small hands growing capable, his spirit healing under the steady, unconditional love Elias provided. The shocking turn Elias's life had taken was, for now, a purely internal one, the unexpected, overwhelming joy and responsibility of fatherhood. He hadn't realized how much his own heart had been orphaned until Billy arrived to fill its empty rooms. Then came the letter, delivered by the circuit rider, bearing an official-looking seal from Fort Shaw, a military outpost several days' ride to the north. Elias, accustomed to correspondence relating only to cattle prices or land leases, opened it with a flicker of mild curiosity. As he read, the blood drained from his face, his hand tightening on the paper until his knuckles were white. The letter was from a Colonel James Harrison, inquiring about a surviving child from the Devil's Pass stagecoach disaster a year prior, a boy named William, believed to be the son of Captain Alistair Finch and his wife, Annabelle Finch, who had both perished in the attack. Captain Finch, the letter stated, had been en route to Fort Shaw under special assignment, carrying sensitive military dispatches and a significant sum of Army payroll. Neither the dispatches nor the payroll had been recovered. Elias stared at the letter, his mind reeling. Captain Alistair Finch. He remembered the locket, the miniature portrait of the man with the piercing blue eyes in a cavalry uniform. Billy. His Billy was Captain Finch's son. The boy was not just an orphan from a tragic accident. He was the son of a military officer, potentially connected to missing dispatches and a stolen army payroll. The implications were staggering, dangerous. His immediate instinct was protective. He said nothing to Billy, not yet. He needed to think, to understand what this meant. That evening, after Billy was asleep, Elias sat by the dying embers of the fire, the locket in his hand. With a sense of trepidation, he carefully opened it again. He looked at the stern, handsome face of Captain Finch, then at the gentle face of Annabelle. And then, with a newfound urgency, he unfolded the tiny, almost translucent piece of parchment tucked within. It wasn't a letter nor a map. It was a coded message, a series of numbers and seemingly random letters meaningless to the untrained eye. But Elias, in his younger, wilder days before settling down with Martha, had briefly ridden with a scouting party that sometimes used such ciphers. He stared at it, a distant memory stirring, a forgotten skill nudging at the edges of his mind. Dispatches. Payroll. A coded message. Captain Finch had been carrying something vital, something his killers had likely been after. Had they found it? Or was this tiny piece of parchment clutched in an orphan's locket the key? The shocking turn was no longer just emotional, it was tangible, fraught with peril. His adopted son, the quiet boy who was healing his own lonely heart, was now at the center of a dangerous military mystery. Elias felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his gut, a fear not for himself, but for Billy. He had sought to give a boy a home, a future. He had not bargained on inheriting a legacy of secrets and danger. The silence of the ranch house suddenly felt oppressive, charged with unspoken threats. His life and Billy's had just become infinitely more complicated and potentially far more perilous. Elias spent a sleepless night wrestling with the coded message and the implications of Colonel Harrison's letter. The random jumble of letters and numbers on the tiny parchment stared back at him, a silent challenge. He tried to recall the simple substitution ciphers the scouts had used, but this seemed more complex. Frustration gnawed at him. He knew he had to respond to Colonel Harrison, but what could he say? Revealing Billy's possession of a coded message from his father might put the boy in even greater danger, especially if the army payroll thieves were still at large and believed the dispatch held a clue to its whereabouts. The next morning, Elias rode into redemption. He needed advice, but he had to be careful who he trusted. He thought of Sheriff Brody, a decent man, but perhaps out of his depth with military matters and ciphers. His mind settled on old Judge Abernathy, retired now, but known for his sharp intellect and discretion. He found the judge on his porch, a law book open on his lap, a plume of pipe smoke curling into the crisp air. Elias laid out the situation carefully, omitting Billy's possession of the actual coded message for now, focusing on the colonel's letter and his confirmation that Billy was indeed Captain Finch's son. Judge Abernathy listened intently, his keen eyes missing nothing. Alistair Finch, the judge mused, stroking his white beard. I remember the name. A good officer by all accounts. His death was a tragedy and the missing payroll a scandal. The army was tight-lipped about the whole affair. He paused. This coded dispatch, if it exists and is found, could be crucial. But you're right to be cautious, Elias. If the men responsible for that ambush are still out there, they might believe the boy, or anything he possesses from his father, could lead to them or the money. Elias then made a calculated decision. He trusted the judge's wisdom. He described the tiny parchment, its coded nature. Judge Abernathy's eyebrows rose. Intriguing. Captain Finch must have had reason to believe he was in danger to hide it so cleverly. A locket worn by his wife, then his son, ingenious. The judge then leaned forward, his voice lowering. There was a man, a former army cryptographer, dishonorably discharged some years back, named Silas Croft. Rumor has it he drifted through these territories. A brilliant mind, but unstable, fond of the bottle. If anyone could break a military cipher of that era, it might be him. But finding him and trusting him would be a gamble. The shocking turn in Elias's life was deepening, pulling him into a web of espionage and thievery he was ill-equipped to handle. His simple desire to be a father was now entangled with a dangerous quest for truth. He wrote back to Colonel Harrison, confirming Billy's identity but making no mention of the coded parchment, stating only that the boy remembered little and possessed only a few personal keepsakes of his mother. It was a partial truth, designed to buy time. He then began discreet inquiries about Silas Croft. The name drew blank stares from most, but eventually a grizzled trapper remembered a man fitting Croft's description, a recluse living in a dilapidated shack up in the Whisperwind Canyon, a place known for its treacherous paths and sudden storms. Elias knew he had to try. The key to Billy's past and potentially to his safety might lie with this disgraced cryptographer. He arranged for Billy to stay with Mrs. Henderson, a kind widow in town who often looked after children, telling Billy he had urgent ranch business that would take him away for a few days. Billy, trusting as ever, hugged him tightly, his small face etched with a worry that tore at Elias's heart. As Elias rode towards Whisperwind Canyon, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He was a rancher, a father, not a spy or a detective. Yet, for Billy's sake, he had to uncover the truth hidden within that tiny piece of parchment, whatever the cost. The path ahead was uncertain, shadowed by the ghosts of Captain Finch's last mission and the unknown enemies who had cut it short. Whisperwind Canyon lived up to its name. The wind howled through the narrow rock passages like a tormented spirit, making the journey treacherous and unsettling. Elias finally found Silas Croft's shack, a dilapidated hovel clinging precariously to the canyon wall, smoke trickling lazily from its crooked chimney. Croft himself was a wreck of a man, his eyes rheumy, his hands shaking, the smell of stale whiskey clinging to him like a shroud. Yet, when Elias carefully explained his purpose, showing Croft a meticulously hand-drawn copy of the coded message from the locket, he wouldn't risk the original. A flicker of the man's former brilliance ignited in his clouded eyes. Military cipher, keyword substitution, likely with a numerical shift based on the date of dispatch or a pre-agreed sequence. Croft muttered, his fingers tracing the symbols. Finch, yes, I knew of his work. Clever man for 2 days. Croft, fueled by black coffee and a bottle of whiskey Elias had brought as a reluctant offering, hunched over the copied message. Elias waited, his patience stretched thin, the wind outside a constant, unnerving symphony. Finally, on the third morning, Croft looked up, a triumphant, almost manic gleam in his eyes. Got it, he rasped, his voice hoarse. The keyword is Annabelle. His wife's name. Sentimental fool or a genius, depending on how you look at it. Croft then revealed the decoded message. It was short, chillingly direct, Blackwood supplying renegades. Payroll route compromised. Evidence hidden. Serpent's tooth. For Billy Blackwood. The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Marcus Blackwood was a powerful, seemingly respectable freighting magnate who operated out of Helena with fingers in many pies across the territory. He'd even bid on Bar T cattle once. Renegades. Payroll route compromised. Evidence hidden. Serpent's Tooth. Elias knew that landmark, a distinctive rock formation near Devil's Pass, not far from where the stagecoach had been attacked. Captain Finch had not just been carrying payroll, he had uncovered a conspiracy, a betrayal from within, and Blackwood was at its heart. Finch had likely suspected he wouldn't make it to Fort Shaw and had hidden his evidence, leaving a clue for his son, Billy, in the most intimate way possible. The shocking turn had become a terrifying vortex. Blackwood was not just a thief, he was a traitor, supplying renegades, likely the same ones who had attacked the stagecoach and murdered Billy's parents. And now Elias Thorne, a simple rancher, and his adopted son held the key to exposing him. Elias paid Croft what he'd promised, along with a stern warning to keep his mouth shut, a warning Croft, in his liquor-fueled haze, seemed to barely register. Riding back towards redemption, Elias's mind raced. He had to get to Serpent's Tooth, find Finch's evidence before Blackwood or his men could. He also had to protect Billy, who was now, unknowingly, a direct threat to a very dangerous man. Upon reaching redemption, he went straight to Judge Abernathy, laying out the decoded message and its horrifying implications. The judge listened, his face growing grimmer with each word. Marcus Blackwood, he said heavily. He has connections, influence. This is a hornet's nest, Elias. You'll need more than just courage. The judge advised him to contact Colonel Harrison immediately to share the decoded message and coordinate with the army. He also suggested Elias deputize a few trusted men if he intended to go to Serpent's Tooth. Time was of the essence. Blackwood, if he suspected his operation was in jeopardy, would stop at nothing. Elias sent an urgent wire to Colonel Harrison via the telegraph office. He then gathered Jeb, his foreman, and 2 of his most reliable hands, men he'd trust with his life, and now with Billy's. He explained the situation, their faces hardening as they understood the peril. As they prepared to ride for Serpent's Tooth, a dust-covered rider galloped into redemption, heading straight for the sheriff's office. It was one of Blackwood's men. A cold dread washed over Elias. Had Blackwood somehow learned of Croft or of Elias's inquiries? The confrontation he had feared was about to begin, sooner and perhaps more violently than he had anticipated. His life had not just taken a shocking turn, it had become a battle for survival, for justice, and for the future of the orphaned boy he now loved as his own. The arrival of Blackwood's man in redemption sent a ripple of alarm through Elias and his small band. They quickly learned the man wasn't there about Elias directly, not yet. He was making loud inquiries about a stolen strongbox supposedly lost in the Devil's Pass area around the time of the Stagecoach Massacre, offering a substantial reward for its return, no questions asked. It was a thinly veiled attempt by Blackwood to retrieve Captain Finch's hidden evidence, a clear sign he suspected something was amiss, perhaps that Finch had managed to hide more than just the payroll he'd stolen. Elias knew they had no time to lose. Leaving Judge Abernathy to discreetly inform Sheriff Brody and manage the situation in town, Elias, Jeb, and his two hands rode hard for Serpent's Tooth, praying they weren't too late. Colonel Harrison's telegraphed reply had been swift and decisive. A heavily armed army detachment was en route from Fort Shaw to rendezvous with them and apprehend Blackwood, but it would take them at least a day to arrive. They were on their own for now. Serpent's Tooth was a jagged outcrop of rock, its twin peaks like fangs against the sky. Following the cryptic clue, evidence hidden. Serpent's Tooth. For Billy, Elias searched the area, his heart pounding. Finch wouldn't have hidden it anywhere obvious. He thought about a father's love, a desperate last act. For Billy, it had to be somewhere a small boy might notice or somewhere connected to him. After an hour of fruitless searching, Jeb pointed to a small, weathered wooden carving of a bird, almost hidden in a crevice near the base of one of the fangs, the kind of trinket a father might carve for his son. Behind it, wedged deep into the rock, was a small, oilskin-wrapped packet. Inside were ledgers detailing Blackwood's illegal arms sales to renegade tribes, contracts signed with his own hand, and a map marking the routes he used, along with the location where he'd stashed the stolen army payroll. It was damning. Just as they secured the packet, a shout echoed from the rocks above. Blackwood, along with a half-dozen of his hired guns, had anticipated them, or perhaps had been watching Serpent's Tooth all along. A gunfight erupted, the canyon exploding with the roar of rifles. Elias and his men, outnumbered, took cover, returning fire. Jeb took a bullet to the arm but fought on. Elias, driven by a cold fury and the image of Billy's innocent face, fought with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed. He was no longer just a rancher, he was a father protecting his son's legacy, fighting for the justice Billy's parents deserved. The tide turned with the distant sound of a bugle. Colonel Harrison's troops, having made incredible time, arrived like avenging angels, surrounding Blackwood and his men. Faced with organized military force, Blackwood's guns quickly fell silent. Marcus Blackwood, the powerful magnate, the hidden traitor, was arrested, his reign of corruption over. The stolen payroll was recovered and Captain Finch's name was cleared of any suspicion, his heroism acknowledged. Elias returned to redemption a changed man. He had faced down mortal danger, unraveled a conspiracy, and secured justice for Billy's parents. But the most profound turn was the one that had happened in his own heart. He held Billy close that night, the boy now safe, his future secured not by potential wealth from a father's hidden stash, but by the truth being brought to light and by the unwavering love of the man who had chosen to be his pa. The shocking turn his life had taken with Billy's adoption had led him down a perilous path, but it had also led him to a deeper understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds of family. His ranch was still his life, but it was no longer an empty empire. It was a home filled with the laughter of a boy who had found his place and the quiet, profound joy of a single dad cowboy whose life had been irrevocably, wonderfully, and yes, shockingly, transformed. Perhaps you found your own life taking unexpected turns, leading you to responsibilities or challenges you never anticipated. How do these unforeseen journeys shape us? Elias Thorne sought to fill a void in his life by adopting Billy, only to find himself embroiled in a dangerous quest that tested his courage to its limits. But through it all, his love for his son became his guiding star. What does it truly mean to become a parent? To take on the mantle of protector and guide, especially when faced with the ghosts of a child's past. The journey of Elias and Billy is a testament to the idea that family is not just about blood, but about choice, commitment, and the courage to face down darkness for those we love. If this story of a cowboy, an orphan, and the shocking secrets that bound them together resonated with you, please consider liking this video. Subscribe for more tales of the heart of unexpected heroes and the enduring strength found in the most unlikely families. And we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What's the most shocking, yet ultimately rewarding, turn your own life has ever taken?